moonlit sky, and the waves carry a sound that is not just the rhythm of water, but the whispers of a forgotten suffering. Anchored in the cold Atlantic lies an immense wooden vessel, once a proud merchant ship and now turned into a floating prison. Its dark hull scarred by storms and battles, its timbers swollen with salt and silence. As the tide rises and falls, the ship creaks like an ancient wounded beast, breathing through the cracks of Drossels. Rotting wood, inside the ship the air is heavy with a mixture of dampness, stale sweat, and decaying memories. The narrow corridor is lit only by the faint flicker of oil lamps swinging with every violent sway of the ocean, casting long distorted shadows on the walls. Each shadow looks like it belongs to a man long gone, yet still trapped somewhere between the planks. Once this ship carried hundreds of prisoners, men dragged from wars, from rebellions, from poverty and crime. Now it remains as a silent witness to their agony. The iron chains that held them still hang from the beams, rusted and stiff. They clink softly whenever the ship moves, as if the ghosts of the past still tug at them. Every creak and every whisper of wind feels like a lost voice calling from a time when hope and light were swallowed by darkness. This is not just a prison ship, it is a graveyard drifting on water, a testament to cruelty and neglect, forgotten by history yet alive in its echoes, waiting for someone brave enough to listen to its story. As you step deeper into the lower deck, the atmosphere thickens like an invisible weight pressing against your chest. The wooden stairs groan under your feet, as if the ship itself resents your presence. The darkness grows heavier, and the lantern's faint glow struggles to stretch beyond a few feet. Every corner feels alive with a cold awareness. The floor is littered with splinters of wood and scraps of rotted rope, and the air carries a bitter taste of salt mixed with the faint scent of dried blood. This was the place where prisoners were kept for months, sometimes years, without sunlight, without fresh air, without a moment of peace. Rows of narrow wooden bunks lined the walls stacked 3 high, each barely wide enough for a man to turn in his sleep. Many never did sleep at all, because the chains bound their ankles and wrists, forcing them to lie still through endless nights. The constant rocking of the ship made the bunks sway like unstable coffins, and the moans of the sick echoed. Through the hull, with a haunting rhythm, diseases spread here faster than whispers. Fever swept through the prisoners like wildfire, leaving bodies cold and still, while others lay beside them, unable to move, unable to escape the horror of watching death crawl closer each day. Outside, the guards rarely came down unless to drag away a corpse or to silence anyone who dared to cry too loudly. Their footsteps were heavy and cruel, and the sound of their boots on these floors brought terror to every prisoner. Yet now there are no guards, no prisoners, only silence and memory. But when the wind howls through the cracks, you can almost hear faint cries of men pleading for water, for freedom, for a sliver of mercy that never came. Moving toward the heart of the ship, you reach the area once known as the punishment deck, a place more feared than death itself. The lantern trembles in your hand as the air grows colder, as if every shiver of the ship carries the remnants of suffering trapped in these walls. This section is smaller, tighter, and shaped like a narrowing throat, swallowing all light and hope. Rusty shackles are embedded into the wooden beams and floorboards, showing deep marks where prisoners struggled in desperation. The wood around the chains is carved with scratches and faint carvings, like silent messages of men who begged to be remembered. On the far side of the chamber stands a reinforced wooden post where the most severe punishments were carried out, the ropes tied around it. Still, looks sturdy even though centuries have passed, the fibers stiff and stained with the dampness of time. You can almost imagine the sound of lashes echoing in the darkness, followed by the muffled cries of men who refused to break even when their bodies did. The smell down here is different, not just of decay, but of something old and heavy. A lingering presence that clings to your skin and refuses to let go. Every whisper of wind that travels through this deck feels like a voice too soft to understand, but impossible to ignore. It is as though the past is trying to speak, trying to pull you into its sorrow and warn you of the torment that once lived here. Even now the ship groans under the pressure of memories it cannot escape, and as you stand in the center of the punishment deck, a strange sensation crawls up your spine, making you feel that you are no longer alone, that something unseen is watching every breath you take. As you climb upward toward the middle deck, the air shifts slightly, growing less suffocating, yet far from safe. The dim lantern light sways with the movement of the ship, casting long, wavering shadows along the curved wooden walls. Here lies what once served as the mess area where food was distributed, though calling it food would be an insult to the word. The long wooden tables, now split and warped by moisture, stand like skeletons of a forgotten routine. The benches scattered around them speak of the chaos that once filled this deck. In the 1700s, prisoners were given barely enough to survive a thin, watery gruel, sometimes moldy bread, sometimes nothing at all. Fights often broke out here as starving men lunged for scraps, their desperation stronger than their fear of punishment. The memory of those moments lingers in the air like a silent tension that refuses to fade. The ship's groans mix with the faint echoes of bowls clattering and voices shouting, though no living soul remains to create. Such noise, you can almost see imaginations forming shadows of gaunt men with hollow cheeks and trembling hands, begging for one more spoon of food, one more chance to live through another night. The walls here are marked with stains from spilled rations and from men collapsing from exhaustion, their bodies too weak to stay upright. The sea outside pounded against the hull day after day, and prisoners heard those waves as a cruel reminder of freedom just out of reach. A freedom they could see but never touch. Standing in this space, you can feel the weight of their hunger and their fading hope like a cold breath curling against your neck, reminding you that life on this ship was not just harsh, it was a slow, deliberate unraveling of the human spirit. As you move toward the stern of the ship, the atmosphere becomes heavier again, as if each step is pulling you deeper into the ship's buried grief. The floorboards beneath your feet feel softer and fragile, swollen by centuries of dampness. The lantern's glow flickers against the wooden ribs of the vessel, like weak breaths in the darkness. This part of the ship once served as the infirmary, though the word itself feels misplaced, because there was no real healing here, only temporary pauses in suffering. The broken remains of wooden cots lie pressed against the walls, their surfaces stained with dark patches that time has failed to erase. The air hangs thick with the memory of fever and sickness men packed shoulder to shoulder, gasping for breath, while the ocean's cold seeped through every crack. Doctors, if they could even be called that, were scarce, and supplies nearly non-existent. So most prisoners were left to endure their illnesses on their own. Moans and ragged coughs once filled this space, creating a haunting chorus that echoed against the beams, while outside the relentless waves crashed like a cruel heartbeat. In the corner, an old metal bowl lies overturned, a reminder of desperate attempts to bring water to the dying. And sometimes the water was too salty, sometimes contaminated, sometimes far too late. You can almost picture the faces of men whose eyes dimmed slowly, their fingers reaching out for help that never came, their names swallowed by the sea and their stories erased by the tides of time. Standing here, you feel a sudden chill crawl along your arms, as though the cold breath of those last moments is still hovering in the air, whispering through the broken planks, and reminding you that this ship was not just a prison. It was a vessel of countless final breaths, drifting endlessly across the ocean. Climbing toward the upper deck, you feel the shift in the air as a faint current of wind pushes through the cracks in the boards, carrying with it the scent of the open sea. The lantern's light grows brighter here, though the shadows remain stubborn, stretching long and thin along the planks, as if reaching for something they can never touch. This area once held the guards' quarters, the place where men tasked with controlling the prisoners lived, ate, and slept. Though their presence is long gone, the atmosphere still carries a strange mix of authority and dread. Wooden chests lay open with their lids snapped by time, and inside you can see remnants of old cloth, scraps of uniforms stiff from seawater and age. In one corner, a heavy wooden chair stands tilted, as if someone had risen from it in a hurry, leaving behind a moment frozen in time. The walls are covered with faint outlines of weapons that once hung here, muskets, cutlasses, and iron-tipped batons, tools used not just for order, but for intimidation and cruelty. Even though the guards had more freedom than the prisoners, their lives on this ship were poisoned by the same despair. The endless rocking of the waves, the constant fear of rebellion, the sickness that spread without mercy, and the guilt that seeped into their minds as they watched men waste away under their watch. At night their footsteps echoed along this deck, and those steps brought terror below. But up here it was different. The guards heard whispers too, sometimes in its quiet hours, the sound of chains clinking without being touched, and the faint echo of voices drifting from the darkness below. Many believed the ship itself was haunted, even during its time at sea, a vessel cursed by suffering and stained with the agony of men who had lost everything. As you stand in the guards' quarters, the wind rattles the shutters, and for a moment you can almost feel the presence of eyes watching from the shadows, as if those who once ruled this deck never truly left, and their guilt is still rooted deep within the ship's bones. Stepping out onto the main deck, you feel the sudden strike of cold ocean air against your skin, the wind rushing past as though it has been waiting centuries to escape the suffocating silence below. The sky stretches endlessly above you, with clouds drifting slowly across a pale moon, casting a dim silver light over the weathered planks of the deck. Here the ship feels larger, stronger, and somehow more alive, as if the ocean itself is holding it afloat out of memory rather than strength. The sails, long torn and crumbled, lie in shredded pieces against the masts, their fabric stiff and brittle like the skin of an ancient corpse. The ropes dangle loosely, swaying with every push of the wind, and each movement produces a faint, eerie hum that vibrates through the entire vessel. This deck was once the boundary between captivity and the cruel freedom of the sea, a place where prisoners came for brief moments to breathe the open air, though Their ankles remained bound and their eyes guarded by stern watchmen. The ocean would crash against the sides of the ship, sending salty spray into their faces, a reminder of the world they would never fully touch again. Some men would stare into the horizon dreaming of escape, while others had already surrendered their minds to the endless waves, their thoughts drifting away like lost gulls. The deck holds countless footprints etched into its wood, traces of men who paced back and forth, hoping for miracles that never arrived. Even now, if you listen closely, you can hear the whispers of the wind slipping between the masts like soft, broken voices calling out names swallowed by time. The ship rocks gently beneath your feet, and in the quiet you feel something unsettling, a sensation that the ocean is holding stories you have yet to uncover, and that the ship is guiding you toward them slowly, deliberately, as though it has not finished telling its tale, not yet. As you follow the ship's creaking spine toward the bow, the wind grows fiercer, wrapping around you like a cold hand pulling you forward, while the moonlight sharpens and stretches every shadow across the deck. This section of the ship feels different from the rest, not just because of the exposure to the open sea, but because of the strange silence that settles here thicker than anywhere else. The bow stands like a solemn monument rising against the restless waves, its wooden structure splintered by centuries of storms yet still clinging to its shape as if refusing to surrender. From here the prisoners would stare out into the dark water searching for any sign of land, any glimmer of hope. Yet all they found was endless blackness that blurred the line between sky and sea. At night, when the guards were distracted, the prisoners would whisper to each other about escape. Some planned to jump into the ocean, thinking they could swim to safety, though most knew the currents would swallow them before. They could reach even the faintest silhouette of shore. Stories spread among the men that the ocean around the ship was cursed, that unseen hands pulled drowning men deeper and deeper, until the water itself claimed their voices forever. Standing here, you can almost feel the pull of those currents, as if the sea wants to drag the ship down into its depths, to bury the suffering once and for all. The bow creaks under your feet, echoing like a long, aching sigh, and for a moment the wind pauses just enough to let you hear something faint, something almost like breathing, drifting from below the waves. Your heart tightens at the sound as the ship shifts with a slow, deliberate motion, as though it knows you are listening, and it wants you to hear the truth of what happened in these waters. The truth that still lingers unseen beneath the dark rolling tide, as you turn away from the bow and make your way toward the center of the ship again. A strange awareness settles over you like a thin veil of unease draped across your shoulders. The wind that once roared now grows quieter. The shadows stretch longer, and the ship seems to sink into an eerie calm that is heavier than noise itself. You begin to realize that this silence is not empty. It is dense, filled with a weight that presses into your chest with each step you take, as if the ship is slowly tightening its grip around you. You reach a narrow stairway leading down into a hidden section not marked on any map, a place forgotten even by those who once sailed here, and as the lantern light flickers against the wooden walls, you notice scratches, marks, symbols etched into the planks as though desperate hands tried to leave behind warnings or messages for anyone brave enough to enter. The air grows colder and a faint trembling hum travels through the beams under your feet, a vibration that does not come from the waves but from something deeper within the ship itself. Each breath feels colder, and each step echoes louder the darkness. Swallowing the sound almost as quickly as it is made, you reach a small hatch, half open, half broken, and for a moment you hesitate, because every instinct in your body is whispering that what lies beyond is something the ship buried for a reason. Still, you push it open and peer inside, and the lantern reveals a cramped, hidden compartment filled with ropes, iron hooks, and tools that look more cruel than practical. This was no storage room. This was where guards would interrogate men in secret, punishing those who threatened rebellion or refused to obey their commands. The floor is stained darker here, and the air carries a sharp metallic scent that has endured through time, a smell you recognize instantly, because it is the scent of blood mixed with salt and sorrow. You feel the walls tighten around you as if the ship is breathing, and the shadows in the corner flicker in a way that feels too deliberate to be caused by wind, and for the first time, you sense it clearly that something unseen has been following you, watching you, and waiting for you to step into this space, the heart of its darkest secrets. Emerging from the hidden compartment, you feel an almost tangible shift in the atmosphere, as though the ship itself has exhaled a long-held breath, and now the weight of centuries seems to settle over the deck like a blanket of shadow. The moonlight slices through gaps in the railing, casting narrow beams across the worn wood, and illuminating the faint traces of footprints left behind by those who once paced endlessly. Looking around you, notice the remnants of barrels and crates, scattered as if it's abandoned in haste, their surfaces swollen with water and cracked from time. The scent of salt mixes with the faint musk of decay, making every inhalation heavy with the past. The mainmast looms above you, a dark pillar carved with deep grooves and marks from ropes and struggles. Sailors once climbed here to adjust sails, but now the grooves seem like silent scars of the countless hands that clung to them in fear. Leaning against the railing, the vast ocean stretches endlessly, its surface dark and restless, and it is easy to imagine the prisoners leaning over this same edge, wishing they could taste freedom. Though knowing it would never come, the waves slap against the hull with a rhythm that mimics a heartbeat, slow, deliberate, and relentless. From below the ship, a faint echo rises like a whisper brushing against the underside of the deck, a sound almost too soft to hear, yet impossible to ignore. And standing there, it becomes clear that this ship is more than wood and nails. It is a Betu, vessel of memories, suffering, and unspoken stories. It is alive with the echoes of the past, and though centuries have passed, the spirits of those who suffered here remain tethered to its frame, waiting to be remembered, waiting for someone to understand what it endured and what it witnessed. The wind picks up again, and for a moment you feel as if the ship itself is guiding you through its tale, whispering the final words of part of a story that is still unfolding. As the night deepens, the ship seems to grow heavier under the weight of unseen memories. Each creak of the planks feels like a soft moan echoing from the past. The lantern light flickers violently, as though reacting to the presence of something unseen, and shadows begin to twist along the deck as if replaying moments long forgotten. The rigging above sways slowly with the wind, producing a faint rattling that mimics distant chains. Stepping closer to the midship area, you notice the remnants of old barrels used to store water, and meager rations. Their wooden surfaces warped and cracked. The air smells sharper here, a mix of salt, rust, and decay, lingering like the ghost of hunger. You imagine the prisoners huddled in cramped spaces below, listening to the ocean while counting the hours until a meager meal, or perhaps nothing at all. The guards' footsteps above, once striking fear into every man below, now replaced by silence so heavy it presses against your chest and makes your own heartbeat feel loud and intrusive. Leaning over the railing, you feel a sudden chill wrap around your spine, as if the memories of men who once stared into the same dark waters are brushing against your mind. The ship rocks gently yet purposefully, as though it remembers the terror it carried, the agony it hosted, the whispered conversations in the dark, the secret punishments inflicted without mercy, and you begin to understand that every plank, every rope, every rusted nail is a vessel for memory. The ship itself, a storyteller, unwilling to let go of what it witnessed, and as the wind gusts and the lantern trembles, you feel that for every story it has told, there are hundreds more trapped within its bones, silent, waiting, unforgotten. Making your way toward the aft deck, the air grows colder, sharper, and the sound of the ocean seems to fade into a low, rhythmic pulse beneath the creaking of the ship. Here the wood is more worn, more fractured, evidence of centuries of storms and battles. Scattered fragments of rope and iron litter the deck, glinting faintly in the lantern light. This was the place where the ship's officers would often gather to oversee the prisoners, and though their presence is gone, the echoes of authority linger like an invisible weight pressing down from above. Leaning over the railing, you can imagine the men below looking up, their eyes filled with longing, despair, a fleeting hope that freedom might arrive with the wind or the first glimpse of land. The ocean stretches endlessly beyond the horizon, dark, restless, a mirror for the hopelessness carried within the hull. The aft deck is quieter, yet somehow heavier, each gust of wind carrying faint whispers as though the ship itself is speaking, recounting the hidden moments of cruelty, exhaustion, and fear. The lantern casts long shadows along the broken timbers, shapes that seem to move just beyond your vision, and the sensation grows that you are not alone, that the stories of those trapped in this ship are brushing against your consciousness, trying to tell their tale, to make you understand the depth of suffering. And even as centuries have passed, the ship refuses to let the memories fade, holding tightly to every scream, every shiver of fear, every act of defiance, as if it knows that history must remember that these men cannot be forgotten, and the wind rising off the ocean carries a final, haunting reminder of the lives that were lost, yet also of the resilience that lingered in those who survived long enough to leave their mark on these planks. As you move along the upper deck toward the ship's forecastle, a sense of solemnity settles over you, the wind whipping through the tattered sails carrying with it a taste of salt and history. The wood beneath your feet is splintered and worn, and every step produces a soft echo that seems to awaken the shadows clinging to the beams. This was once the area where prisoners who were deemed slightly less dangerous might gather briefly for air or a glimpse of the sky, though even here freedom was an illusion, their hands still bound, their eyes watched by cruel guards leaning over the railing. You can imagine men gripping the edges, staring out at the endless waves, whispering prayers or words to loved ones they might never see again. The remnants of barrels and crates scatter across the deck, their surfaces swollen with age and weather, and faint markings on the railings hint at desperate attempts to tally days or leave messages for those who might follow. Above, the rigging sways and rattles with the wind, producing sounds almost like distant chains dragging across the deck below, and the sensation grows that the ship itself is alive, each creak, each groan, a voice telling the story of suffering, hope, and survival. The moonlight falls in fractured beams through the torn sails, illuminating the faces of imagined prisoners as they crouch, huddle, or pace, every expression a frozen testament to endurance. And as you stand there, the wind gusting stronger, you realize that the history of this ship is not simply in records or books. It is etched into the very wood, the iron, the ropes, a living archive of human struggle, and even centuries later, those echoes remain ready to be felt, seen, and remembered by anyone who dares to walk its decks. Walking toward the ship's quarterdeck, the sense of time begins to blur. Each step feels heavier, as though the weight of centuries presses down on your shoulders. The lantern flickers against warped beams and broken planks, casting long, shifting shadows that seem to move independently of the wind. This area once served as the command center where officers gave orders and oversaw the prisoners' suffering. Now it is silent except for the occasional creak of the hull and the distant crash of waves. Against the ship's sides, the remnants of wooden benches and a shattered wheel lie scattered, warped, and cracked, and the smell of damp wood and rust fills the air, imagining the officers pacing here, their boots heavy and commanding. You sense the power dynamics that dictated life below, the constant fear that a wrong move or a whispered word could end in punishment or worse. The wind carries faint echoes of shouting, pleading, the sound of chains rattling below in rhythm with the waves, and for a moment it feels as if the ghosts of authority and despair linger in a perpetual dance. Leaning against the railing, you look down toward the lower decks and see only darkness, yet feel the presence of countless eyes watching from below. The ship rocks gently, almost deliberately, reminding you that it remembers every scream, every act of defiance, every moment of surrender, and though the centuries have passed, the story of this floating prison is alive in its bones, etched into every splintered plank, waiting for those who walk its decks to witness, to feel, and to remember the silent, enduring testimony of lives trapped and lost in its shadow. As you move to the far side of the quarterdeck, the wind grows sharper, carrying the tang of salt and decay. The broken railings groan under the slightest pressure, as if warning you to tread carefully. This section was once a vantage point for guards keeping watch over both the prisoners and the endless horizon. Now it is empty, yet every gust of wind seems to carry the echoes of footsteps, shouts, and whispered curses that once filled the air. The deckboards here are cracked and swollen from centuries of exposure, and faint outlines of footprints remain pressed into the wood, ghostly reminders of men who paced endlessly, dreaming of freedom that never arrived. Leaning over the edge, you see the waves crashing relentlessly against the hull. The same ocean that swallowed hope for so many, the rocking of the ship feels deliberate, almost like a heartbeat, keeping time with the long-forgotten rhythm of suffering. Shadows stretch unnaturally across the planks, twisting in shapes that seem almost human, and for a moment you imagine prisoners leaning out over this railing, their hands tied, their eyes fixed on the horizon, their silent prayers lost to the wind. The air carries a cold, heavy weight, pressing down with the knowledge of despair, disease, hunger, and fear that defined life aboard this vessel, yet in the same breath, there is a strange, stubborn sense of endurance, the unbroken will of those who survived, leaving behind traces of resilience in the planks, in the chains, in the very bones of the ship, as if the vessel itself remembers both cruelty and courage and waits for someone willing to witness both. Moving toward the central mast, the ship seems to tighten around you, as though it senses your presence. The wind howls through the torn sails, carrying with it a faint echo of voices that might be real or might be memory. The deck beneath your feet is uneven, boards warped and splintered from centuries of storms. The ropes hanging from the mast sway with a slow rhythm, producing a soft, eerie creak. This was the lifeline of the ship, the place where orders were given and the prisoner's work was overseen, yet now it feels more like a monument to endurance, a center from which every scream, every act of desperation, every whispered hope once radiated outward into the hull. The shadows cling to the mast and beams, twisting with the lantern light into forms that resemble men hunched over or pacing anxiously. Leaning against the mast, you can almost feel the weight of their presence pressing from every side. The smell of salt, sweat, and decay hangs thick in the air, and each breath feels heavy, carrying centuries of suffering into your lungs. The wind lifts suddenly, tugging at your clothing and whipping loose hair across your face, and with it comes the sensation that the ship itself is alive, remembering every lash, every cry, every quiet act of defiance hidden below in cramped, shadowed corners. You realize that even now this vessel does not simply exist in the past, it holds it. The memories entwined with the wood, the ropes, the rusted iron, and those who walk its deck can feel it, as if the ship wants its story to be told in full, without embellishment, without forgetting the lives that were shaped and broken within its hull. Approaching the starboard side, the ship's creaking becomes more pronounced. each groan echoing like a voice from the past warning of long-forgotten dangers. The lantern light dances across warped planks and rusted fittings, illuminating the remnants of old chains and hooks. The smell of salt and decay thicken the air. This side of the ship was once where prisoners were brought to perform manual labor, carrying heavy loads, hauling ropes, or scrubbing the deck under the watchful eyes of guards, exhaustion etched into every movement, every strained breath. Now only silence remains. Yet it is a silence that is heavy with memory. Each shadow seems to shift slightly, as if recreating the motions of men bent under the weight of work. Leaning over the railing, you imagine the prisoners staring out at the dark, endless ocean, dreaming of escape, their hands raw, their bodies worn, yet some flicker of hope kept them alive. The waves crash relentlessly against the hull, the sound echoing through the timbers and into the lower decks, where once cries of despair and pain would blend with the sound of water and wind. You can feel it here, the invisible presence of lives endured and lives lost. The ship itself seems to pulse with it, as if breathing in the memories of the men it carried. And in that moment, standing on this weathered deck, you sense the weight of history, of suffering, of courage, all coiled together into the very bones of the vessel, demanding to be remembered, felt, and never ignored. Walking toward the port side of the ship, the wind grows colder, sharper, carrying with it the distant scent of brine and wood long soaked with salt and sorrow. The deck here is more broken, boards splintered and rotting, every step producing a soft, mournful creak that seems to echo from centuries past. This side of the ship was once used to confine prisoners during storms, the heaving waves making their chains rattle violently, forcing men to cling to anything solid to avoid being thrown. Against the walls, the air is thick with the memory of fear, panic, and the bitter taste of salt in mouths parched from thirst. Leaning against the railing, you can almost see the ghosts of men hunched over, gripping ropes, or desperately peering out at the endless dark waters. Their eyes filled with longing and despair, the waves crash against the hull with a rhythmic ferocity, reminding you that freedom was always just out of reach. Shadows twist unnaturally along the deck, their shapes suggesting movement where none exists, and you feel the weight of countless untold stories pressing down like a tangible force. The ship itself seems to exhale slowly, a sigh carrying the grief of those who endured months, even years, trapped within its confines. Yet amid the suffocating memory of suffering, there is also the faint trace of human resilience, the stubborn will to survive despite every cruelty, a testament carved into the timbers that remain standing, whispering that though centuries have passed, the echoes of the prisoners' lives still cling to this vessel, demanding to be remembered. Moving back toward the center of the ship, the atmosphere grows almost tangible, thick with centuries of fear, despair, and fleeting hope. The lantern light flickers across the warped beams and fractured planks, revealing faint scratches and carvings left by prisoners trying to mark the passage of days. The smell of salt, sweat, and rot hangs heavily, a reminder that life here was, measured not in hours, but in endurance. Below deck, the faint sound of waves seems amplified, echoing as if the ship itself remembers every plea for mercy and every whisper of defiance. You notice the ropes coiled loosely along the rails, their fibers frayed and stiff, each a silent testament to hands that once gripped them tightly. The wind shifts suddenly, tugging at the lantern and producing a soft groaning sound from the timbers, a sound that feels almost like the ship breathing, alive with memory. Stepping lightly, you sense the invisible presence of countless men who once moved through these spaces, their spirits intertwined with the wood, the iron, and the ropes. Shadows seem to shift in the corners as if reenacting moments of suffering, fear, and rare, quiet triumphs. Leaning against a rail, the vast ocean stretches out endlessly, dark and restless, mirroring the hopelessness that defined life aboard this vessel. And yet the ship seems determined to preserve every detail, every story, every echo, refusing to allow time or forgetfulness to erase the lives that were spent here. Each creak and sway a reminder that the past remains alive, waiting for witnesses who will feel it, understand it, and honor it. Reaching the very end of the ship, the night feels heavier, almost sacred, the lantern light barely illuminating the cracked planks beneath your feet. The wind carries whispers that seem older than time itself, a mixture of fear, sorrow, and resilience. Standing at the stern, looking out over the endless dark waters, you realize that this vessel is more than wood and iron. It is a living archive of human endurance and suffering. Each creak, each groan, each shadow, a story waiting to be remembered. The ghosts of prisoners, guards, and officers alike seem to linger just beyond sight, not to haunt, but to testify. The ship rocks gently, almost deliberately, as if nodding to the centuries of lives it carried. And in that motion you feel a strange reverence, a connection to the countless souls who lived, suffered, and died within its hull. For a moment, the past and present merge, and the ocean itself seems to hold its breath, honoring the memory of those forgotten by history, As you turn away, the lantern's glow catches the splintered timbers one last time, and it becomes clear that though the ship may drift silently on the waves, its story is permanent, etched into the bones of its structure, immortalized in the echoes of the wind and the endless, restless sea, a final testament to suffering, survival, and the indomitable human spirit that refuses to be forgotten.